Well, good morning everybody and welcome to the Queensland Art Gallery and to the first day of our new exhibition Art, Love and Life. I'm Angela Goddard, the curator of Australian art to 1975, and I've put together this show with lots of help. Today we are very honoured to have Dr. Georgina Downey here to give us a lecture on global impressionism and artistic communities. Dr. Downey has contributed to the catalogue, a very interesting chapter on cosmopolitanism and some of the threads, these thematic threads that run through the work of both Ethel Carrick and Phillips. But her research has more generally looked at larger questions in terms of further artists, especially within the Australian context and some of these narratives of cosmopolitanism. So I'm sure that you'll all find this very intriguing, and I'm really looking forward to Georgie's lecture. So please help me welcome Georgie.
Oh, thank you, Angela, for that lovely introduction. And I do commend the catalogue to you, not just because I'm in it, but because Angela's also written 3 chapters. And there's a really wonderful chapter by Dr. Juliet Pearce, who'll be here later on this afternoon, about the role of fashion and clothing in the Edwardian period, and especially in the Fox's paintings. And there's a really interesting chapter by Dr. Andrew Yip on the paintings that they did in North Africa. So I really do commend it to you. Okay, well this afternoon I'm going to look at our couple in the context of a wider circle of their friends and other Australians who left our shores for the exciting metropoles of Paris and London around the turn of last century. So, and I'm going to get to grips with my technology. Global Impressionism and Artistic Communities, Ethel Carrick and Emmanuel Phillips Fox in context. Can everyone hear me? Good. What was global or world Impressionism? It's been defined as painting that emphasised contemporary life, light and colour, whether influenced directly by the French or growing independently out of indigenous sources. As a style, we know that Impressionism was truly a watershed moment in European art, resulting in paintings that reflected a very new philosophy of perception and which needed to be understood and read by spectators in very different ways from those that had come before. But we might be less familiar with the idea that it was a truly international phenomenon. So while we associate Impressionism with Manet, Monet and their capturing of fleeting episodic moments of contemporary French life, this was just one part of what was a global movement. Impressionism was not the first style to travel, but I put it to you this afternoon that it was the one that travelled the furthest. In the late 18th century and early 19th century, the picturesque aesthetic, with its focus on the ideal and sublime pastoral landscape, spread throughout Europe to England, Germany and France. And like global Impressionism, the spread of, the picturesque as a style was also sustained by artistic tourism. The 18th century Grand Tour, a coming-of-age ritual for young gentlemen in Europe, was responsible for promoting and spreading the picturesque and its ideals, as the travelling gentlemen visited the great art collections on the continent on their tours and learnt to appreciate artists of the 17th century like Claude and Poussin, who became the models of landscape painting in the next century. The picturesque aesthetic even spread to Tasmania with English artist John Glover and his arrival there in 1831. Glover had been a very successful proponent of the picturesque landscape in England before the final phase of his Australian career. And here we have his A Corroboree of Natives, Mills Plains, 1832, and you can see the use of the trees as sort of coulisses, or sort of almost like theatre curtains framing a sort of a classical sort of event in the centre of the picture, and you see the relationship and the style between the two. So I propose that the picturesque was also a travelling style. And like Impressionism, picturesque landscape painting was based on a philosophy of perception based on classical principles. But compared with Impressionism, you couldn't call the spread of the picturesque truly global, For while it may have been produced in South America, for example by Augustus Earle, or Japan, it was carried there by European proponents rather than growing independently out of indigenous sources. What aided the spread of global Impressionism was that modernism itself had fostered a global consciousness. This consciousness was reflected in the diffusion of all-embracing ideologies and technologies of early last century that were truly transnational and secular, such as Marxism, liberalism, scientific discoveries, international diplomacy, and new international communication systems. So here for the first time, we're seeing cultural ideas becoming global, leading to practices that had no particular centre, despite the dominance of the modern metropoles of Paris, London, and New York. In this modern phenomena, globalisation of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we see a much faster and more comprehensive spread of objects and signs and people across regions and international continental spaces, patterns of reciprocal interaction developed between those in the cultural centres and those coming to such centres. Cosmopolitan communities, such as the kind that Ethel and Emmanuel Phillips Fox joined, developed as a result of cultural globalisation and played a critical role in fostering late 19th century and early 20th century modernism. Artists left their peripheral or colonial zones, whether they were provincial, whether artists were living in the provinces of France or England, or whether they were coming from much further, like Australia or New Zealand or Canada. And they went to the metropolitan centres to complete their training, further their careers, and gain new experience. Modernity, with its structures of centres and peripheries, of cities and provinces, drew artists together in Paris, where they found the freedom to understand this new style. In many cases, they then returned home, where they were able to synthesise the techniques of Impressionism with the national agendas drawn from their own cultures. Between the 1880s and the 1920s, Impressionism was not only central within Paris, but also arose simultaneously in a number of other countries around the world, making it impermeable to national borders. The Heidelberg School in Australia is one such example. From the 1880s, artists began to leave Australia in large numbers. The first exodus, as it was called by Australian art historian Bernard Smith, was undertaken by Tom Roberts, Hugh Ramsay, John Longfellow, Arthur Streeton, Charles Conder, and many others. The Impressionism that impressed them on the journeys they took to Paris and London in the 1880s was the more anglicised practice of artists like Jules Bastien Lepage and Stanhope Forbes and George Clausen, who painted at St Ives. These artists had themselves absorbed French Impressionism on site in Paris and adapted the divided palette and broken brushstrokes to a more tonal flat end, with a particular love of the silvery grey light that we can see in Australian Fred McCubbin's great cycle of fin de siècle national Australian landscapes. I can see the similarity in the treatment of the grass and the sky and the flat silvery light between the Bastien Lepage and Fred McCubbin's Down on His Luck. Part of this great cycle, this particular wonderful picture is in the Art Gallery of Western Australia. I love this work. This just sums up so much of my life and of many other Australians. The travel of artists of the Heidelberg generation was considered absolutely crucial to their careers, though sometimes in individual cases the departure had more of the character of an escape, with the catalyst for departure being a perception, one that has endured in some cases to the present, that Australia is too parochial to engage meaningfully in culture. And here we have this wonderful painting, An Australian's Dream of Europe, where an Australian artist has fallen asleep after working all day in his studio in front of a very traditional academic style painting of Madonna and Child. And as he dreams of sort of goddess of good luck and fortune in the blue shawl, and a sort of male floating character sort of joins her, sort of almost like sort of the parents of his voyage. And I've always read this building in the background behind them all as representing either the National Academy or the salons as a sort of site where he's going to go and be famous. It's like the real life is going on in Europe, and life in Australia is just a dream. However, as suggested in my introduction, this feeling of being parochial was in itself a effect of modernity, and this desire to paint contemporary life in new ways was universally shared, with the urge to study nature's light with a lighter palette and looser brushwork. And this was a universal impulse, according to American art historian Norma Brood. Impressionism arose in France, England, Australia, Japan, Italy, Spain, Latin America, the US and Canada, Belgium and Holland, Scandinavia, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Russia, and Eastern Europe. And while the way to go about it and subject matter in some cases emanated from France, the interest in painting outside, directly from the motif, did arise as a spontaneous interest and preoccupation in all these countries. And here I've collected for you a selection of world Impressionism with a sort of a focus I hope to bring on, in particular, the Spanish one, this down here. I'm sort of trying to tease out this idea of a focus on light, but a particular country's light, in a way that then leads into a sort of a discourse of national pride and identity. And here we have Spanish people, women sewing the sails for under this very sparkling Spanish light, but engaged in traditional peasant occupations of that particular country, much in the same way that the Heidelberg School focused on drovers and stockmen. Here's some more examples. And you can see this very strong relationship, sort of like a family style of both subject matter, motif, and technique, and focus on light, and the sketching out of the tonal qualities actually on site, on plein air or outside. Artists in these countries adopted a sort of an adapted Impressionism with local national inflections. So while France was the presumed cradle of Impressionism, hundreds of artists situated themselves in an adapted or global world Impressionism. And while there were local variations, the unifying force behind it all was a shared concern with capturing nature's light on site or on plein air. It's time then that we accepted that the critical discourse in art history has been overly concerned with national borders. Impressionism has not, until recently, been seen as a global movement. It's been seen as linear, as fitting in chronologically with the art histories of individual nations. Norma Brood encourages us to see Impressionism and late Impressionism, as Carrick and Fox adopted it, as centrifugal and interactive, with outcroppings in other countries that we should not dismiss as dilute forms of the real thing, as variants or regional schools, but as interconnected, that is, as both local and global at the same time, a sort of simultaneous flowering. This nationalism was linked to something intrinsic in the philosophy of Impressionism itself. The light that we see in these international examples is not just any light, but one unique to the culture and climate of the artist's homeland. In the countries where it flowered, Impressionism also opened a way for women artists, since its primary genres, everyday life, still life, interiors, and daily chores, were associated with the feminine sphere, and women artists were some of the earliest proponents and experimenters with the form. In fact, Norma Brood suggests that Impressionism showed an openness to women as active contributors, matched only by the French Rococo. Impressionism was associated with both freedom and modernity, and moreover, it emerged as in both a metropolitan and a cosmopolitan milieu. So getting to the metropole was step one for men and women artists. Supporting world Impressionism then was the increased rapidity, accessibility and popularity of mass travel. More shipping lines, faster journeys and cheaper fares permitted many Australians aspiring to be professional artists to travel to Paris and London. Historian Angela Woolacott has estimated that 10,000 Australians and New Zealanders left for London each year in the 1880s. Colonial expatriates were drawn to big European cities where modernism and Impressionism was believed to be more acceptable. And I brought these two images together. The one on the left is the routes taken from Australia on the Orient line, which is the original P&O company. And you can see the ships would have gone from Sydney and then come around to Melbourne and Adelaide and then Perth and then up past India through, I think, Colombo and Straits, and then up to Europe. And this matches really nicely with one of my favourite Condas, which is the departure of the Ss Orient. So Condas painted one of these ships belonging to this company leaving Circular Quay in Sydney on this beautiful rainy day, and once again you can see the silvery light, the flat tones and the reflections, and the sort of the tiny elegant figures watching their friends leave for these great trips to Europe. Colonial expatriates were drawn to big European cities where modernism was believed to be more acceptable, and the like-minded could find each other. Raymond Williams has written that the city was the key factor in the modernist shift. It was understood as the place where innovation could occur and like-minded communities could form, and they did. And this is this cosmopolitan circle that the Foxes joined. Women's travel. Travel to study art was a cultural ritual that was intelligible to family and friends, and that didn't compromise Australian women's femininity. Contemporary reports on women's departures and overseas successes in newspapers like the British Australasian emphasised their talent, their modesty and their promise, and many women kept diaries or novelised their experiences of travelling to Paris and London. And there's this nice quote from Louise Mack where she talks about the call to England, and a lot of this Austral British, these dialogues about the relationship with England are couched in quite visceral terms. There's lots of references to blood ties and crimson threads. It's obviously, because a lot of people still had a lot of relatives or had actually come over. There was a fair mix at this point still in Australian society of English-born people with a smaller proportion of Australian-born. So this relationship was very central. By 1900, Australian women could draw on a range of socially acceptable reasons to travel. Women desiring further training in the arts had a particular advantage because it was the common belief at home that local institutions, art schools, could only take an artist to an intermediary level of skill. Ross Pesman, in Duty Free, Australian Women Abroad, has counted more than 60 professional Australian women artists departing between 1880 and 1914. Angela Woolacott has counted more than 13,000 Australian women living in London in 1911. So you can see that there's, the Australians are very present, they're a very vocal presence in London and Paris, and some of the more delightful background reading that I've done by Australian historians, and one of them in particular talks about Australians finding each other in Earl's Court by cooeying in the street, and this cooey would be met by an answering cooey a few streets down, and they would all meet in the pub. So yes, all those cultural stereotypes were established in this time. In most cases, Australian artists went to London and sometimes Paris, with women more likely to go straight to Paris because they had a greater need of the free studios or ateliers that offered them access to the life model, to the nude, something that Anglo-Saxon art schools were reluctant to do. When they arrived, Australians tended to find Paris actually more hospitable, despite the language barrier, and more open to them than London, perhaps because they were not dogged by their accents or by classifications as colonials in the way that they were in London. We gather something of this from a letter to a friend written by Charles Conder in 1893, and he writes, "I can't understand the English enough for them to understand me, and I dread the winters. One feels so out of it. London does not supply its own amusements, as does Paris." Australians found a huge melting pot of other expatriates there when they arrived. Paris was multinational and multi-ethnic. Christopher Green, English art historian, estimates that between 1900 and 1940, some 40% of artists in Montparnasse, which was an inner city suburb on the left bank in Paris, some 40% of artists who lived there were foreign, which is a huge, huge proportion. Australian artists found Paris the very medium of the modern and the very platform for its emergence. American female artist Celia Bow, one of the Americans who headed for Paris, commented, "The immense value to the student lies in the place itself. Everything is here. The art schools, cheap accommodation, museums, social life and the salons." And American artist William Merritt Chase added, "I would rather go to Europe than heaven." Australian artists, like the Americans, joined communities of taste when they arrived. The city was a beacon to many artists of different nationalities and modern persuasions, and they in turn transformed its art scene in an environment best described as one of mutual promotion. Married in 1905, the Foxes set up in Paris in a purpose-built studio apartment in the centre of the left bank's artistic culture, where they lived until returning to Australia together in 1913. And I've selected some pictures of Paris to create an atmosphere for you. And I'm very proud. This photo here of Bessie Davidson's a South Australian expatriate painter who was known to the Foxes and a great friend of Rupert Bunny's, who was a bit of a sort of great social introducer of the cosmopolitan artists to each other. Bessie Davidson lived in the Rue Boissonade, just quite near the Foxes, and they would have gone to places like the Pantheon, and they would have gone into the Louvre to study and to the theatre. So these are all sort of places around the Latin Quarter. And I took that photo myself. It's not very good, but yeah, Bessie Davidson was an artist I studied for my thesis. So now, this period from 1905 to 1913 was one that witnessed progress and professional recognition for both members of this artistic marriage. In Paris's cosmopolitan expatriate community, Fox and Carrick were ideally placed to establish successful careers as artists. Of these brilliant conditions, Fox, on the eve of his Australian retrospective in Melbourne, wrote simply that the works from this period were the best I have ever painted. During these golden years together, Carrick and Fox discovered what has been called the wonderful imperial art touring circuit. The Foxes and fellow artists travelled to paint, and they painted to travel, since they were seeking subjects for the popular leisure genre that they knew would be favoured by the official Paris Salon and the annual major exhibition at London's Royal Academy. Carrick, Fox and their friends George Coates and his wife Dora Meeson, George Lambert, Hugh Ramsey, Tom Roberts, Arthur Streeton, Tudor St George Tucker and Rupert Bunny produced pictures that were reviewed and quite often purchased across three markets: Australian, British and French. This made them, as Jan Minchin has said, not quite Australian, not quite English and not quite French, but able to feel at home in all these places. The plein air or out-of-doors painting locations they all travelled to included Cornwall, Brittany, North Africa, Italy and Spain. Now, this map that I found actually charts Lord Frederick Leighton's travels, but he was travelling a beaten path that continued into the 20th century. So the dotted lines and the places that he went to paint were still relevant 20 or 30 years later. And you can see just how far and how rich and how varied their travel was. Carrick and Fox and the artists in their circle usually wintered in Paris, working up paintings from oil sketches of destinations that they'd been to the summer before, in order to get these ready for submission to the salons in spring and autumn. In summer, they toured to artist colonies such as Cornwall's St Ives or Pont-Aven and Étaples in northern France, and sometimes to the society beaches of Royan and Dinard. Destinations like Venice, Spain and Morocco were calendared in for the spring and autumn months because they were hot. In this manner, the artists in the imperial art touring circuit followed the light as impressionists. The various artist colonies of France, England and Germany and Holland drew many, many foreign Anglophone artists, and they were established in the mid to late 19th century as a necessary adjunct to plein airism and the practice of painting out of doors from landscape subjects. There. In this collection of slides, I've chosen some motifs that would have been done at various artist colonies. The idea was that in the summer months when Paris was unbearably hot and stuffy, artists with their partners and perhaps students went to these coastal towns where they got billeted with local families for not a lot of money, and they painted outdoors every day, following the rituals of the people of the village, as we can see with Phillips Fox as a tender portrait of a girl probably going for her first communion. Etap, this is the marketplace there, just near the artist community. And there were lots of other Australians there. South Australians, Margaret Preston, Mari Tuck, Bessie Davidson would go there. There were 2 Melbourne artist sisters, Issa and Alison Ray, took up permanent residence in the Etap art community. Rupert Bunny used to go there. So it was a great place to sort of travel cheaply with a group of friends and produce a whole lot of paintings to work up later on for the salons. Down here, it's a little bit dark, I'm sorry, is another really popular colony in St Ives in Cornwall, which was popular because of the light and also because of the fishing culture there. That was considered very, very good to paint. And I'll just go back. They also explored Spain, North Africa and the Middle East. Here they sketched and researched so that their paintings were authentic in exacting detail. These regions were high on the must-see list for Australian artists abroad in the early 20th century, and Andrew Yip explores this in his chapter in the Art, Love and Life catalogue. So the practice of using travel to find and capture interesting subjects and cultures was well in place by the 1910s, when the Foxes were abroad and making their own trips to Brittany and Cornwall and North Africa. And they were, in fact, in doing this, in being on this circuit where you went around Europe and North Africa in particular months of the year. In doing so, they're drawing on and adding to a long history in Western culture of using the trope of travel to discover oneself. And this goes back to the travels of Odysseus, goes back to the Gentleman's Grand Tour. And so they were following these beaten paths to culture, as well as having holidays and producing popular motifs for the salons. Paris as home. Moving to Paris facilitated the Foxes' immersion in cosmopolitan culture, and here the couple emerged with new styles and subjects and turned away from questions of their own nationality and towards the formation of more improvised and fluid identities. And I've just found for you here today a nice picture of a South Australian Gladys Rennell in Paris. And between this portrait by Margaret Preston of Bessie Davidson in their Latin Quarter studio, picture from 1906, just called The Studio, is their mutual friend Margaret Preston, who I'm sure you've all heard of. And here is a photograph of where the Foxes lived. This was the entrance to the sort of nest of artist studio apartments where they lived. And when I did a bit of research for this, I discovered that artists are still living there because each of the studios have like a skylight and a separate studio and living quarters. So it was a perfect conditions for being artists in a professional sense. In Paris, the Australian, the British and the North American contingents in this cosmopolitan network tended to interact with each other as a result of sharing a common language. However, there were lots of other artists there. Also in Paris were Scandinavians, artists of the diaspora like the Slavs and the Poles and the Russians who'd left their homelands for the freedom promised by France, as well as artists from Japan and China. The community of Anglophone artists gathered in Montparnasse on the left bank and sometimes in Montmartre on the right, but the majority of the English-speaking Anglophone expat community were on the left bank. The community that Carrick and Fox joined in 1905 was highly interwoven, and it was a sociable scene with connections fostered through close living quarters, study at the ateliers together, exhibiting at the salons together, and frequenting small clubs and societies. And one of the societies I've been particularly interested in, but I've had great trouble finding more detail on, is the Latin Quarter Society, which was run and established by Australians. And there were some Bessie Gibson and Alison Green, 2 Queensland expatriate artists were members as well. But it's very hard to find any evidence. These were small clubs and not necessarily documented. They're sort of fairly fly-by-night arrangements. But the bigger, more powerful national societies were the American Girls Club and the American Artists Association. and apparently Rupert Bunny would play cards every afternoon at the American Artists Association because they had a nice bar. So there was a lot of interaction between all the artists in this way. Now, the relatively easy life in Paris made it one of the most livable cities you can imagine, with artists such as Australian Hilda Rix-Nicholas and American Abigail May Alcott describing the city as one vast studio in their memoirs. Interestingly, rather than being taught by the avant-garde such as Henri Matisse or André Lotte, both of whom ran private art schools in the period, the expatriates sought out the veteran French academics, William Adolphe Bouguereau, Jean-Paul Laurens, Alexandre Cabanel, Carolus Duran, and Jean-Léon Gérôme, all of whom passed on very traditional principles of life drawing and painting in the ateliers and at the École des Beaux-Arts. And this is the École des Beaux-Arts, it's the entrance gates, and I like to think that's a female student about to go in, although women didn't have access until, I think, 1901 to the École. But this is where Emmanuel Phillips Fox studied, and a host of Australians were lucky enough. It was very competitive to get in, and quite expensive. Hans Hyson was there between 1901 and 1903, and of course Gladys Rennell down here, she studied for a while at the École des Beaux-Arts. But what they tended to do, rather than go to a big national art school, was to go to the commercial ateliers, which were smaller and had a wider range of life models, and they had a master come in to check the work at the end of the day. But they're sort of much more run on a sort of club-like basis. So this is one of the great reasons why Australians came to Paris to study at places like this. In addition, the expatriates actually taught each other. Americans Alexander Harrison taught E. Phillips Fox, Richard Miller taught the Australians Bessie Davidson and Hilda Rix-Nicholas, and the Scottish painter John Duncan Ferguson partnered in 1910 after Bunny had left this private teaching school with Anglo-French artist Jacques-Émile Blanche to co-run the private art teaching studio, the Atelier Blanche. So I'll just talk you through this. That's Richard Miller work. So he taught Bessie Davidson, and you can see some similarity in treatment, and Richard Miller was also a close friend of Rupert Bunny's. And it's really interesting. I had a look at these three pictures this morning and thought, well, you know, what's going on in terms of the representation of women? And although all these artists had their own style, but they're all friends, the two men have represented women quite differently. In just one of my recent insights is that in the Bunny and the Miller, the women are packaged and displayed in terms of a much gentle and refined Edwardian accessible femininity, whereas in the Davidson, this is her partner and best friend, Mademoiselle Leroy, who back is turned to the viewer, and she's much more contained and much less packaged as an aesthetic sort of object. But nonetheless, you can see the similarity in the treatment of light and the sort of sparkling brush strokes, very dry paint. So you can understand by comparing the Davidson and the Miller particularly that they were teacher and student. Now, the most vital time in the Cosmopolitan art calendar were the submissions in spring every year of works to the old and new salons. The Parisian ritual of sending in day brought out camaraderie as well as competition, as neighbours struggled down streets together with paintings on their backs or in carts to go to the Grand and the Petit Palais. A close friend of the Foxes, Australian artist Hilda Rix-Nicholas, describes the anxiety and suspense of sending in day. And this is a long quote from Hilda Rix-Nicholas. She wrote this in 1912. The time seems to have been all too short when sending in day comes, and from resplendent studio and garret go forth thousands of aspirations, to be delivered by private cars, taxis, wagons, and even rickety pushcarts to the doors of the Grand Palais or on the Champs-Élysées. Then follow the days of waiting. Hope and fear play havoc with the brain. When the postman hands you the envelope containing the printed announcement, which informs you of your fate, even before you open it, you can see the colour of the paper within. If green, it thrusts you into a despair so great that it seems fatal, but if pink, the gods are good and your heart leaps for joy. So if the hanging jury had selected you, you got a pink note. Obviously, if you didn't get in, you got green. I found these cartoons down here come from research that's been done by a colleague of mine in Western Australia, Richard Reid. He's looking at the backs of paintings. But here we have the unsuccessful artist who's obviously got the green slip, and he's refusé is stamped on the side of the pictures along the edge there. So he's doing the march of shame back to his garret in the left bank. Here's a picture of the jury actually at work selecting pictures. Really interesting framing composition with the backs of the jury turned to the viewer, and this sticks being held up to denote that a picture's been chosen. The people hold their walking sticks up, and it was sort of democratic. This is interesting up here too. This is you see the number of women artists doing their march to the salon, and the example that this sending in day was sort of a group cultural event on the left bank. And here is the reverse. This is the artist who does get the pink slip. Marche triomphale. So he's got selected, and even his moustache is sort of poking up with excitement because he's got in, he's successful. This will make his career, because once you had a picture selected in the salon, it was sort of like your credentials as a professional artist. And this is a really wonderful detail from Henri from Rousseau. And he actually has depicted this as a military march. All these little patterns down here are actually artists with pictures under their arms, and they're all walking to the salon. And here is the carts carrying some other pictures. And they're all going to the Société des Artistes Indépendants, which was an exhibiting society formed in rejection of the old and new salons, to give people a chance who the jury were doing work that was too radical for the juries to want to hang. So each April and May, the Grand and Petit Palais became virtual cities of canvas and marble, displaying vast numbers of paintings and sculptures. In 1880, the old salon displayed 5,000 paintings occupying some 8 miles of wall space. By the early 1920s, submissions, if you include submissions to the Salon d'Automne, which obviously happened in autumn, the total number of paintings on display had grown to over 10,000. That's a big exhibition. The salons also attracted a staggering number of visitors, with both French and foreign people coming in their hordes. Historian Ross King concludes that cheap entry tickets and the social cachet of being seen there with the right people resulted in huge crowds. In some years, he says, as many as 1 million people visited the salon during its 6-week run, meaning crowds averaged more than 23,000 a day. Not being seen in this melee wasn't a problem at the salon for Fox, because he'd been elected a sociétaire in 1910, and so this allowed him to hang 6 pictures of any size, hung according to his instructions. So he wasn't going to be skied or put like up the top of the ceiling, or he wasn't going to be put down the bottom along the skirting boards, where the sort of less powerful, less rated artists were hung. And this is a painting depicting a Friday at the old salon, the Salon des Artistes Français. And as you can see, there's a crush of powerful art world players, society beauties. I mean, there's literally no space to hardly sort of stand out. You can see it was actually packed with people. And people are walking along here to get to the other rooms, hundreds and hundreds of rooms full of paintings and sculptures. And Australian art historian Faye Brower has commented that she's looked at all the faces and linked these up with photographic portraits and identified everyone in this picture. Yes. And she hasn't found any Australians. And she suggests that she reads this picture as one where there are looks, connections and groups of people, power groupings, museum directors, people from the government, bureaucrats, people who are like the real movers and shakers in the Paris art world, are power brokering here, but there are no Australians. So, and she concludes that a lot of the machinations and the politics would have gone on over the heads of the foreign artists, although they were benefiting greatly from being able to exhibit in the salons. The Foxes embraced world impressionism and the freedom it offered from the old hierarchies of academic painting. They and their circle in Paris were exploring and enriching what might be called Impressionism's afterlife, adapting its principles to suit their own times, the visual culture of the Edwardian era, or the Belle Epoque, in which art training methods, institutional structures and audiences all differed from the 1870s, where Impressionism was a much more radical movement. Now, it's also evident from the range of subject matter that Carrick and Fox produced that family resemblances between their work and the work of the other cosmopolitan artists were very strong. And they suggest that this circle of artists in Paris formed subjects that you could almost describe as operating in a cosmopolitan space, a space that's not particularly unique to any one nation, that comprise of a series of motifs that sort of transcend the notion of national identity. And on the left, sort of illustrate this point, I've chosen Fox's Nude from 1911, and I've paired it with a close friend of Fox's, an American artist called Carl Friedrich Friesecker, who 3 years later produces this almost identical motif of a naked girl lying on the grass in dappled light, and is similarly interested in both sort of mildly erotic connotations of the picture, but also the play of light on a very pale skin. So I mean, it's fairly obvious that their themes and their friendships and their careers were all very, very tightly interwoven. Despite partaking of world impressionism, are these cosmopolitan paintings merely depicting, for pleasure's sake, the peculiarly Edwardian pursuit of cultivated recreation? The world they depict, and the world that's depicted in a number of images that I've shown you this afternoon, is leisurely and it's stylish, and only a minority of the population could probably afford it. But these images don't raise any questions about the social inequalities or the rigid hierarchies of Edwardian society. They seem to our jaded eyes to be all surfaces of apparent splendour, extravagance and excess, and these conceal this yawning gap between ideal and real life. Arguably, we might be troubled by such an appetite for pleasure and games. And this has prompted the author, the novelist J.B. Priestley, to describe this period as a lost golden age, all the more radiant because it is on the other side of the huge black pit of war. But we need to appreciate these works not on our terms, but with an Edwardian perspective. Edwardian artists and critics used a layered language of connoisseurship, often evoking musical terms. They loved bravura surfaces that preceded content, but they did not disavow content or meaning in the pictures. In fact, surfaces were intended to function in a multi-layered and complex manner. The Edwardian viewer would have known exactly how to appreciate and read such a picture as Fox's alfresco for its formal qualities. They would have valued the complex and carefully planned decoration, rhythmic organisation, colour harmonies, charm, cadence and pattern in the picture. Australian art historian Anne Galbally has written critically of what she calls persistent blandness in much Edwardian painting. On the other hand, the English art historian Ken McConkie has argued that far from being bland or void of psychological interest and depth, the Edwardian eye is charged with thought and emotion. He explains how Edwardian artists developed techniques aimed at halting time temporarily in order to evoke memory and desire. Qualities of light and painting on site or on plein air were critical to this effect. Flows of sensation needed to be translated into pigment expertly, accurately, swiftly and on the spot, so that these sensations could be recalled in the studio when the painting was being completed and subsequently shared with audiences. McConkie's analysis of the role of memory and desire in Edwardian painting neatly summarises Carrick and Fox's own concerns with the right lighting conditions as the origin of their working methods. While opinions are sharply divided on the significance of Edwardian paintings, exhibitions like this, like Art, Love and Life, provide an excellent opportunity for its re-evaluation and for opening a discussion around the participation of Australian expatriates in world movements such as Impressionism. For E. Phillips Fox and Ethel Carrick, moving to Paris in 1905 had a profound effect on the methods and subjects of their paintings, the establishment of their careers, and the recognition of their outstanding talents. Had they not settled in the centre of this cosmopolitan art community in Paris, Carrick would possibly have built a solid but minor reputation in England, and Fox, had he not undertaken his second trip to Paris with Carrick, would doubtless have still been a major name in Australian painting, but arguably would not have achieved the stature, the epithet of our Australian Renoir, which he was called in a review of his work in the late 1980s. Our Australian Renoir was enormously a respectful and positive title. Finally, without the travel undertaken by the Foxes as part of their remarkable artistic partnership, audiences here would be deprived of these fascinating insights into the Edwardian mind and heart offered by their paintings. Thank you.
Insights into some of the larger narratives surrounding this exhibition. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions.
And I've been told if you want to ask a question, you have to call for the microphone, which Fiona is helpfully carrying.
Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, I've just got a quick question about, you talked about the painting jewellery, that particular painting.
Yeah.
I know it probably shouldn't, but did it make a difference as to whether or not the paintings were framed and how they were framed and the style of the frame? As to whether they got the pink or the green slip?
I'm not sure. I think you might have to talk to a curatorial person. I know that... well, the pictures on the tray that the poor rejected artist carries are unframed, and rejected is written along the edge. So it might be that they were framed after they had been chosen, possibly even by the salon, or if they were successful, they brought their frames in.
Actually, we have our gallery, we have an in-house framer who at gallery, professional person who works in our frames, Robert Zilli, and he's actually giving a talk on one of the frames in the exhibition tomorrow afternoon. So he's somebody who would know a lot of the history about and indeed some of the frames in this exhibition. There's actually a style of frame in the show that's actually called the Phillips Fox style of frame. So that's it's an entire kind of really interesting history. So
yeah, I have also seen cartoons in Punch where the Royal Academy, also a very similar situation where you've got the accepted paintings, the rejected ones all lined up, and there's a whole row of frames. So it would suggest from drawings from the time that a successful painting was then joined with its frame and then hung. It's probably too heavy to, if you're walking down the street with, these paintings were big in those days, you probably wanted to put the frame on afterwards. And also, they were expensive, they were a big investment for artists, so you probably wouldn't go to the trouble of getting a special E. Phillips Fox frame if you weren't sure you were going to get in.
Hi, that was an excellent talk.
Thank you.
While I was listening, I couldn't help but think about what seems to me a problematic relationship that art history has with particularly the French Academy and the Royal Academy. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are about, the fact that so many expatriate Australians at the turn of the century, they went to Paris, they went to the Royal Academy, they sought out people like William Bouguereau, Jean-Léon Gérôme, and obviously they didn't have the attitudes that modernists might have had toward the French Academy. I guess my question is, so many of these influential and pioneering Australian painters embraced the academic tradition, but today it seems that people are much more ambivalent about the role of that tradition or its quality. I'm just wondering how that is that changing in Australian sort of art historical scholarship?
Well, that's an interesting question. The French Salon is still going. The Société Nationale des Beaux-Arts. You can still submit paintings, and they tend to be quite academic and traditional. But But what art historians like Christopher Green go into explaining is the fact that in the 1910s, the monopoly that the salons had as the centre of the art market, the only place to make your name and your career, if you'd hung a picture there, you were 100 times more likely to be able to sell it. And the salon also brokered big state commissions. Their power, their stranglehold was sort of broken when a small private art gallery came into being. And so artists began to go there, especially the more radical groups like the Fauves and later on the Cubists. And so, yeah, it's like the feast moved on away from the salon, and the salon sort of like crept on. But at the time that the Foxes were there, you didn't have those choices. It was absolutely the biggest art market in the world. It was credentialing in every way. In fact, you couldn't get sales. It would be very hard to sell. A lot of the pictures that we have in Australia were bought by public collections because they'd been exhibited in a salon. So that's sort of like, it was like a quality control filter. Art Gallery of South Australia bought al fresco because it had done so well at the salon. So, yeah, it really wasn't avoidable. Would you agree?
Yeah. Maybe one further question from Juliet.
I was just going to add to that there's it's a very interesting question. It's also very much about specific Australian practices of art history, because you can see even far back as the 1970s, there was a beginning of a thawing of the opposition of salon to real art and to art history to the salon, because there was a sort of movement with the growing respectability in the 20s and 30s of the extreme avant-garde of Picasso, Matisse. The salon, the reputation of the salon, particularly outside France, dipped somewhat. There was still quite a strong support for it, particularly in the 30s, and particularly around sort of issues of nationalism and cosmopolitanism and the rise of a French fascist movement and things like that. But it's a particularly Australian virus, this sort of dislike of the salon, and it's been far more, both the salon and the Royal Academy have been far more appreciably understood by the late 1970s, 1980s, by overseas art historians, and it's just a particular quirk of Australian art history, and also makes it very problematical that we have our nationalist heroes, but they weren't interested in the extreme avant-garde. They were, as you said, all gravitated towards the official bodies. So it's a very strange thing, but I think we are finally, sort of 30 years after the rest of the world, finally starting to have a much more sort of relaxed attitude about this. And I think the research into cosmopolitanism is something that's actually leading this, and possibly this whole sort of thread of research from Ruth Subins onwards into the relationship of Fox to the salon and the relationship of Bastien Lepage, because until about the 1970s we still thought that Tom Roberts saw Monet and Manet, and that's where he got his ideas from, not Bastien Lepage. So I just thought I'd add that, but it is a very strange quirk, wouldn't you say, Georgina?
Oh, definitely. And I think art historians like Faye Brower, who's done all that work on the Paris salons, identifying key players, how the expatriates fitted in. It's hard research to do, and it's only been done recently because you have to do it there. You have to go to Paris. You can't. And there's a language issue, yeah. I mean, our national art history has been written very much without reference to these very important institutions. It's been absolutely critical. So when we're less hung up now, we're willing to go over there. We've now sort of brought our expatriates back. That's why I put these two pictures up. I mean, don't worry about the George Lambert, because he was expatriate too, but his subject matter there, the Australian landscape, is a direct dichotomy from, Ethel Carrick's beautiful flower market in Paris. One's about being Australian, the other one's absolutely unimportant. So we're beginning to sort of own our expatriates a lot more than we did, instead of writing them out of Australian history.
And yes, things are changing, and new research is coming up all the time, including some French researchers working on Australian artists and their relationship to the French context. So I think we'll have to stop there because we have another panel session starting at 2:30. I hope that you can all return for that. And if you'd like to join me in thanking Georgie.
Thank you very much. Thanks.